Welcome to Candlelight Mystery, where hidden truths flicker to life in the glow of a single flame. Tonight, we begin a tale in which the quiet brilliance of Miss Marple outshines even the legendary Sherlock Holmes. Settle in, the mystery ahead will challenge every assumption you hold. Miss Marple arrives quietly at a grand London estate where a baffling locked-room murder has shaken every guest. Sherlock Holmes is already on the case, confident that logic alone will reveal the truth. Yet something feels strangely off to Miss Marple. The atmosphere holds a tension no footprint or ash trace can explain. She senses hidden emotions shifting beneath polite smiles and practiced gestures. While Holmes studies clues, Miss Marple studies people, and the truth begins to form in her mind like a picture slowly sharpening. A single overlooked detail will change everything. The chase for truth begins. Chapter 1. A Curious Invitation. The village of Street Mary Mead awoke gently, as it always did, wrapped in the soft hush of an English morning. The chimneys exhaled thin threads of smoke, the hedgerows glistened with dew, and the sparrows chirped as though rehearsing a well-worn melody. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in her customary lavender cardigan and sensible shoes, stood beside her garden bed, observing the chrysanthemums with a thoughtful expression. She had been tending the same flowers for decades and knew each stem as another woman might know her relatives. The slightest droop, the faintest discoloration, nothing escaped her eye. It was this keen sense of noticing things, this unerring attention to the smallest detail, that had made her quietly formidable, not that she ever claimed such a title. Miss Marple preferred to describe herself as a simple observer of human nature, though those who had seen her in action would have scoffed at the modesty. Her sharp mind hid behind polite smiles and knitted shawls. She had just clipped a stubborn leaf when she heard footsteps approaching the garden gate. Looking up, she found Mr. Pettigrew from the local post office, waving a pale envelope in her direction. "Morning, Miss Marple," he called cheerfully. "A special letter for you. Came all the way from London." Miss Marple blinked. "From London? How unusual. Thank you, Mr. Pettigrew." She wiped her hands on her apron and took the envelope. It was of thick, expensive paper, sealed with dark red wax, bearing an unfamiliar crest, an elaborate intertwining of letters she couldn't immediately decipher. Intrigued, she returned inside, settled by her small writing desk, and carefully opened the seal. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper, written in elegant handwriting. Asterisk, asterisk, Miss Jane Marple. Your reputation, though modestly guarded, has reached the ears of certain individuals interested in matters of particular subtlety. You are cordially invited to attend a private consultation in London regarding a matter of delicate urgency. Arrangements have been made for your travel. A carriage will arrive at noon tomorrow. Yours sincerely, Sir Reginald Ashcroft, asterisk, asterisk. Miss Marple read the letter twice, then a third time for good measure. Her reputation reached certain ears. She sniffed lightly. People were given to exaggeration, but the tone of the letter, though flattering, carried an unmistakable seriousness. And the name Sir Reginald Ashcroft she had heard somewhere, perhaps in a newspaper, a political figure, a philanthropist. The details floated at the edge of her memory like a leaf on water. She leaned back, lace gloves resting on her lap. A private consultation, in London of all places. She had not visited the city in years, not since her nephew Raymond's literary award ceremony. But the invitation felt different, unsettling in a way she couldn't quite articulate. Still, curiosity was a powerful tug. Before she could form more thoughts, the doorbell chimed, and the familiar face of her friend, Mrs. Dolly Bantry, appeared in the doorway. "Jane, you won't believe what I've just heard. Oh, what's that expression? You look as though someone's told you Street Mary Mead has been built over ancient Roman ruins." "Hardly that dramatic," Miss Marple said with a gentle smile, handing her the letter. "But perhaps unusual enough." Mrs. Bantry snatched it eagerly, adjusting her spectacles. Within moments her jaw dropped. "London? A carriage coming for you? Jane, dear, Are you secretly moonlighting as a detective for the government? Miss Marple chuckled softly. Certainly not, but it seems someone wishes to consult me. Mrs. Bantry plopped onto the sofa. This is extraordinary. You must go. Imagine the excitement. Excitement was hardly Miss Marple's motivation. If anything, the letter stirred a faint apprehension, an intuition she had long learned to trust. Yet something else tugged at her too, a sense of responsibility. If someone genuinely needed help, could she refuse? I suppose I shall go, she murmured, if only to see why such secrecy is necessary. And so, the next morning, precisely at noon, a polished black motor car stopped outside her cottage. The chauffeur, a tall, stoic man in a cap, helped her in. Miss Marple carried only a small bag with knitting needles, 2 skeins of soft blue wool, and a notebook. The countryside rolled past in a tapestry of gold fields and green hedges, gradually giving way to cobbled streets and the bustle of London. Miss Marple observed everything: the hurried pedestrians, the newspaper vendors shouting headlines, the peculiar fog clinging to street corners despite the sunshine. The car finally stopped before a grand townhouse in Belgravia. The building's marble pillars gleamed, and ornate lanterns framed the entryway. Inside, she was led through a long corridor to a study filled with shelves of leather-bound books. Heavy drapes filtered the light into a warm, amber glow. A tall, silver-haired gentleman rose from behind an oak desk. "Miss Marple," he greeted, extending his hand. "I am Sir Reginald Ashcroft. Thank you for coming on such short notice." "It appears I had little choice," Miss Marple said with polite humour. "Your letter was intriguing." Sir Reginald smiled faintly. "I hope you will forgive the secrecy. We require discretion in this matter." He gestured toward a second armchair positioned by the fireplace. Only then did Miss Marple notice the figure sitting there, lean, sharp-featured, wearing a grey suit and holding a pipe with casual confidence. The man stood. "Miss Marple," he said in a deep, measured voice, "I am Sherlock Holmes." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. Sherlock Holmes, the detective of legend, the man whose cases filled half the newspapers of Europe in earlier years. That Sherlock Holmes. She inclined her head politely. "Mr. Holmes, this is quite unexpected." Holmes's eyes glinted. "Indeed, it seems we are to consult on the same matter." Miss Marple clasped her hands gently. "And what matter might that be?" Holmes took a step forward. "A theft," he said. "A theft most puzzling. And, perhaps," he paused, studying her with curiosity, "one requiring a mind altogether different from my own." Miss Marple felt the room grow still. A strange partnership was about to begin. Miss Marple sat gracefully in the armchair, folding her gloves neatly in her lap. She could feel Sherlock Holmes's gaze upon her, sharp, analytical, and slightly amused, as though he were examining an unexpected variable in a familiar equation. Sir Reginald Ashcroft moved behind his desk, adjusting a stack of documents with hands that trembled faintly. "I imagine," Miss Marple began gently, "that I have not been summoned merely for polite conversation." Holmes's lips curled into a thin smile. "Quite right. Shall we begin at the beginning, Sir Reginald?" Sir Reginald nodded, drawing a slow breath. "A portrait has gone missing. Not an ordinary portrait, an heirloom of considerable value, both financially and historically. It depicts my great-grandfather, Sir Evelyn Ashcroft, who served during the Crimean War. Painted by a celebrated artist of the era, it has been in our family for generations." Holmes tapped his pipe against his palm. "A portrait kept in a locked gallery room, within a house guarded at all hours, with no signs of forced entry. The perfect recipe for a paradox." Miss Marple tilted her head. "And yet the portrait vanished." "Precisely," Holmes replied. "Vanished without a trace, frame and all." Sir Reginald continued. "Only 5 people had access. Myself, my wife, our curator Mr. Finch, my niece Emily, and our long-time housekeeper, Mrs. Alder. But I will not believe any one of them responsible." Holmes exhaled quietly. Unfortunately, belief is rarely a reliable indicator of truth. Miss Marple shifted slightly, noticing Sir Reginald's rigid posture. He was a man torn between loyalty and reason. "May I ask," she said softly, "why you thought it necessary to involve both Mr. Holmes and myself?" Sir Reginald hesitated, because Mr. Holmes believes the solution is rooted in logic and access, and Mr. Holmes, he looked toward the detective with a strained half-smile, is exceptionally logical. "And Miss Marple?" Holmes asked, one brow arching. Sir Reginald met her eyes. "Because Miss Marple sees what others overlook, human nature, motive, behavior. She sees into people." Miss Marple offered a modest smile. "I only observe things, often very small things." Holmes regarded her thoughtfully, as though reassessing her in that very moment. Sir Reginald cleared his throat. "There is one additional complication. The night before the portrait disappeared, I received an anonymous letter." He pulled an envelope from his drawer and handed it to Holmes. Holmes opened it without ceremony, reading the single line aloud. "What was stolen was never meant to belong to you." Holmes's frown deepened. Miss Marple reached out lightly. "May I?" Holmes handed her the paper. She studied the handwriting, deliberately messy, perhaps intentionally vague. "There is a peculiar balance here," she murmured. "The strokes attempt untidiness, yet the shapes suggest refinement. Someone practiced at disguising their script, but not a habitual liar." Holmes blinked, mildly surprised. "You deduced that from a single sentence?" Miss Marple smiled pleasantly. "One learns things from church ledgers and charity rosters, Mr. Holmes. People reveal themselves unconsciously." Holmes's eyes gleamed with newfound interest. "Indeed." Sir Reginald clasped his hands. "I fear the theft may be only the beginning. That portrait contained, well, information of a personal nature, a secret my family has guarded for over a century." Miss Marple waited, her expression patient. Sir Reginald continued, voice lowered. "My great-grandfather was rumoured to have altered his identity briefly during the war. There are implications. If evidence of that comes out, certain political enemies may exploit it. My position is not without scrutiny." Holmes leaned back. "So the portrait's disappearance might be blackmail." "Or revenge," Miss Marple added gently. Sir Reginald looked distressed. Holmes rose suddenly. "We should visit the Ashcroft estate immediately. Miss Marple, your insight may prove most valuable." Miss Marple stood as well. "If I may trouble you for one thing, Sir Reginald, would you mind telling me more about the household staff?" Holmes gave a short laugh. "Ah, yes. Miss Marple prefers to begin with the least obvious suspects." Miss Marple gave him a polite nod. "One must understand the rhythm of a home before understanding its secrets." Sir Reginald obliged. He described Mrs. Alder, the housekeeper, devoted, punctual, protective of the household. Then Mr. Finch, the curator, meticulous and nervous, with a deep love for art. His niece Emily, bright, charming, though prone to bouts of melancholy. And Lady Ashcroft, elegant but withdrawn, often spending long hours in the garden. Miss Marple absorbed each detail with serene focus. When Sir Reginald finished, Holmes led the way into the corridor, the faint clicking of his boots echoing against the marble. As they exited the townhouse, a breeze rustled Miss Marple's hat. Holmes walked beside her, hands clasped behind his back. "You have an unusual manner of inquiry, Miss Marple," he said. "So I have been told." "You rely on intuition, where others rely on deduction." "Oh no," she corrected gently. "Intuition is simply memory arranged at great speed." Holmes smiled faintly, clearly delighted by the remark. The car arrived, its engine humming low. Holmes held the door open for Miss Marple, who stepped inside with the calm composure of someone boarding a village bus rather than embarking on a high-stakes investigation. As the car pulled into London traffic, Miss Marple watched the passers-by, each face a fleeting story. Holmes watched her, perhaps wondering how this unassuming woman could rival his legendary intellect. Sir Reginald sat opposite them, hands clasped, gaze distant. Holmes finally broke the silence. "There is more to this case than a missing painting." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Yes, something about Sir Reginald's tone suggests fear not only for the portrait, but for what it represents." Holmes tilted his head. "And what do you believe it represents?" Her eyes drifted toward the window. "A secret someone desperately wants revealed, or desperately wants concealed." Holmes studied her for a long moment. "Miss Marple," he said quietly, "I look forward to seeing how your mind works." She folded her hands in her lap. "And I yours, Mr. Holmes. It seems we shall both learn something." The car sped onward, carrying them toward the Ashcroft estate and toward a mystery that would test both deduction and intuition in ways neither expected. Chapter 2. The Case of the Missing Portrait. The Ashcroft estate rose against the countryside like a silent monument, broad, grey-stoned, and dignified, its towering windows glinting faintly beneath a drifting sky. As the motor-car rolled up the gravel driveway, Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, taking in the symmetry of the gardens, the precise trimming of the hedges, and the gravel laid in neat, unwavering lines. Everything about the estate spoke of order, and in Miss Marple's experience, places obsessed with order often hid the most interesting sorts of disorder. Holmes stepped out the moment the car halted. His tall silhouette cast a long shadow across the front steps. Miss Marple followed more gently, pausing a moment to adjust her hat and take in the air, which smelled faintly of pine and polished brass. Sir Reginald walked ahead, his strides brisk, as though he were eager yet anxious to confront the mystery that awaited inside. The grand foyer of the estate was cavernous and echoing, lit by a chandelier that cascaded tiny prisms of light across the polished floor. A staircase wound upward in an elegant curve, its banister shining like dark honey. At the center of the foyer, arranged with almost ceremonial neatness, stood three individuals, presumably the household staff, and Sir Reginald's niece, waiting for their master's return. Holmes's eyes immediately scanned the trio with quick, hawk-like precision. Miss Marple assessed them differently, slowly, warmly, as though greeting familiar parishioners after Sunday service. Sir Reginald cleared his throat. "Allow me to introduce those closest to the household matters." First was Mrs. Alder, the housekeeper, a stout woman in her late 50s, with an air of stern maternal vigilance. Her apron was spotless, and her hands folded with rigid propriety. Next was Mr. Finch, the curator, thin, pale, and nervous-looking, with spectacles perched precariously at the end of his nose. His fingers twitched constantly, as if accustomed to brushing dust off priceless artifacts. Lastly stood Miss Emily Ashcroft, the niece, young, perhaps 23, dressed in soft pastels. She possessed a fragile elegance, her eyes gentle yet shadowed, as though carrying thoughts heavier than her delicate frame suggested. Holmes nodded curtly. "Good afternoon." Miss Marple's greeting was warmer. "How do you do?" Emily stepped forward. "Uncle Reginald wrote to us. We've been terribly worried." Her gaze drifted between Holmes and Miss Marple, lingering with curiosity on the latter. Holmes wasted no time. "Mrs. Alder, when was the last time you personally saw the portrait?" Mrs. Alder straightened. "The morning before it vanished, Mr. Holmes. I dusted the gallery myself, as I do every Thursday." "And nothing seemed amiss?" Holmes pressed. "No, sir." Holmes turned to Mr. Finch. "And you, Mr. Finch?" Finch swallowed. "That evening I was cataloguing the new restoration notes. The portrait was still in place." Miss Marple observed the faint tremor in Finch's voice, not guilt, perhaps, but fear. Of what, she wondered. Holmes's gaze swept to Emily. "Were you in the gallery that night?" Emily shook her head softly. "No, I haven't been in there for days. The portrait always made me feel watched." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Watched?" Emily blushed lightly. "It is simply a feeling, Mr. Holmes. Nothing more." Miss Marple opened her mouth to speak, but Holmes had already pivoted toward the stairs. "Take us to the gallery." Sir Reginald led the way up the staircase, the household trailing behind. Miss Marple followed, her fingers gliding gently along the banister. She noticed a faint scratch pattern near the bottom step, barely visible, but she made a mental note. The gallery door stood at the end of a long corridor. It was locked, and Sir Reginald produced a heavy brass key. Holmes leaned slightly forward. "Who has a copy of this key?" "Only myself and Mr. Finch," Sir Reginald replied. Holmes's eyes flickered. "I see." The door swung open. The gallery was a long, high-ceilinged room bathed in cool light from tall, narrow windows. Portraits of the Ashcroft lineage lined the walls, some proud, some sombre, all staring out with ghostly dignity. But at the far end, where the largest and most ornate frame should have stood, there was nothing but a stark, rectangular emptiness on the wall. Miss Marple stepped inside slowly, taking in the contrast between the faded wallpaper outline and the empty space. Holmes strode directly to the wall, examining the faint marks where the frame had hung. No scratches, no disturbance of dust. Whoever removed it did so with precision. Miss Marple, meanwhile, wandered toward a small side table. She noticed a thin thread, barely a wisp, caught beneath one of the polished legs. She bent gingerly, plucking it up. A thread of velvet, deep blue. She tucked it discreetly into her handkerchief. Holmes circled the room, muttering, "The windows are locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry. The door was locked. Therefore, we are left with only two possibilities. Someone with a key removed the portrait, or it was removed earlier than assumed," Miss Marple finished gently, turning toward him. Holmes blinked, taken aback perhaps by her interruption. Miss Marple continued with quiet calm. "People often believe they remember times accurately, Mr. Holmes, but recollection can be deceptive. Just because the portrait was believed to be in place on Thursday night does not guarantee that it truly was." Sir Reginald's brow furrowed. "But Mr. Finch saw it that evening." Mr. Finch stammered, "Yes, I did." Miss Marple observed his fidgeting hands, the nervous shifting of his feet. Holmes strode toward Finch. "Is that absolutely certain?" Finch's voice cracked. I believe so." Holmes's voice sharpened. "Belief is not certainty." Miss Marple moved forward, placing a gentle hand on Finch's arm. "Mr. Finch, dear, was anything unusual about that evening? Even something you dismissed?" Finch's eyes darted nervously, as though searching his memory. "I do recall hearing whispers in the corridor, but when I looked, no one was there." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Whispers?" Miss Marple's voice softened. "And did you think the voice familiar?" Finch hesitated. "Perhaps Lady Ashcroft." Sir Reginald stiffened. "My wife?" Holmes clasped his hands behind his back. "Then we must speak with Lady Ashcroft immediately." Miss Marple, however, looked once more at the empty wall and felt, with unmistakable certainty, that the truth of the theft began not in the gallery, but somewhere else entirely. Lady Ashcroft was found in the conservatory, seated beside a cluster of white orchids that glowed softly in the filtered daylight. She looked up as Sir Reginald, Holmes, and Miss Marple approached, her expression composed yet distant, like someone who had been grieving long before others noticed. She was a striking woman, tall, graceful, with silvery blonde hair pinned neatly beneath a pearl comb. Her hands rested on her lap, but her fingers twitched ever so slightly, betraying a tension that her serene posture attempted to mask. "Agatha," Sir Reginald said, his voice gentle, "these are the investigators I mentioned." Lady Ashcroft's pale eyes drifted from her husband to Holmes, and then finally settled on Miss Marple. Something in her gaze softened at the sight of the elderly woman. "I see," she murmured. "You've come about the portrait." Holmes stepped forward. "Indeed, we understand you were near the gallery on the evening it was last seen." Her expression tightened barely, but perceptibly to Miss Marple's watchful eye. "Yes," Lady Ashcroft admitted. "I often walk the upper corridor at night. It helps me think." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And did you notice anything unusual that night?" Her fingers curled slightly. only that the house felt restless. Restless? Holmes echoed skeptically. Miss Marple stepped forward with a kind smile. Sometimes homes have moods, don't they? Especially old ones with long histories. Lady Ashcroft's shoulders relaxed a fraction. Exactly, you understand. Miss Marple continued gently. And on that particular night, did anything feel different from usual? Lady Ashcroft hesitated. For a moment it seemed she might say nothing. Then, I thought I heard footsteps in the gallery, soft ones, so soft I wasn't certain. When I entered, the room was empty. The portrait was there, at least. I believe it was. Holmes folded his arms. You believe? Her eyes drifted to the orchids. Memories blur when one is troubled, Mr. Holmes. Sir Reginald knelt beside her chair. Agatha, why didn't you say anything before? Because, she whispered, I wasn't sure if I imagined it. Miss Marple observed the tremble in Lady Ashcroft's hands, the faint tension around her eyes. She had known many women who carried invisible burdens, some emotional, some scandalous, some heartbreakingly simple. This one, Miss Marple suspected, carried more than her share. Holmes's tone softened, though only slightly. Lady Ashcroft, could anyone have entered the gallery without you noticing? Again the hesitation. Then she whispered, Emily? Sir Reginald stiffened. Our niece? She walks at night sometimes, Lady Ashcroft said quietly. She suffers from insomnia. I have found her wandering more than once, lost in thought. Holmes strode to the window and looked out across the gardens. We will speak to Miss Emily again. But Miss Marple was less certain. Emily's melancholy seemed genuine, but nothing about her thus far suggested clandestine behavior. And if she had been in the corridor, why whisper? Miss Marple turned back to Lady Ashcroft. My dear, when you heard those whispers, were they of a single voice or two? Lady Ashcroft's breath caught. Two, she admitted in a small voice. But I recognized neither. And when I reached the gallery, there was silence. Holmes swung around sharply. You didn't mention that earlier. I was afraid of sounding hysterical, she murmured. This house has become unsettling since the portrait vanished. Sir Reginald gently squeezed her shoulder. We will sort this out, Agatha. Holmes checked his watch. Mrs. Alder, Mr. Finch, Emily, everyone within these walls will need to be questioned thoroughly. Interrogated, Sir Reginald corrected with a wince. No, Holmes replied, questioned. Miss Marple and I approach things differently. He glanced toward her. Miss Marple offered a mild smile. I find that people reveal more over tea than they do under pressure. Holmes gave an approving tilt of the head. Before they left the conservatory, Miss Marple's eyes drifted to Lady Ashcroft's shawl, navy blue, with a velvet trim. Very fine velvet. The same shade, she suspected, as the thread she had found in the gallery. Miss Marple tucked this observation into her mental ledger. Holmes paced the length of the room like a caged panther, muttering. No forced entry, no sounds reported. Two voices whispering, a nervous curator, a sleepless niece, a troubled wife. Someone in this house knows more than they admit. Miss Marple, meanwhile, drifted about the room like a gentle breeze. She paused by a sideboard, noting the layer of dust disturbed slightly near the back corner. She traced the surface with her fingertip. Mr. Holmes, she called softly. He approached, impatience shading his features. Yes? Look here, she said, pointing at the dust. Someone placed something here recently, something rectangular. Holmes examined the space, then straightened. A book, perhaps? Miss Marple nodded. Not large enough for the portrait, of course, but possibly a journal or a box. Holmes exhaled sharply. We're chasing shadows. Miss Marple's gaze softened. Shadows often reveal the source of light, Mr. Holmes. He paused, startled by her odd yet perceptive remark. Just then the door creaked open, and Emily appeared, pale and timid. Uncle Reginald asked me to fetch you, she whispered. He wants us all in the drawing room. Holmes nodded curtly and strode past her. Miss Marple, however, lingered. Emily, dear, she said gently. "Are you quite well?" Emily's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I wish I could say yes." Miss Marple touched her hand softly. "Sometimes people think they're keeping a secret for the right reasons, but secrets can grow heavier than one expects." Emily swallowed hard. "I can't say." "Not yet," Miss Marple corrected kindly, "but you will." Emily's breath hitched. She fled down the corridor, leaving Miss Marple watching thoughtfully. Everyone had gathered, Mrs. Alder rigid, Finch trembling, Lady Ashcroft withdrawn, Emily anxious. Holmes stood before the fireplace like a judge about to open proceedings. Sir Reginald spoke first. "We must cooperate fully. The portrait must be found." Holmes stepped forward. "One of you knows exactly what happened in that gallery, and Miss Marple and I will discover who." Miss Marple looked at each face, each flicker of emotion, each attempt to hide fear or guilt or something far more complicated. She folded her hands calmly, because she already sensed the truth. Not the full picture, but the first outline of a motive. And in Miss Marple's world, motives were always the beginning of the end. Chapter 3. A Lady in Shadows. The drawing room at the Ashcroft estate, though richly decorated, felt strangely airless as everyone took their places. Heavy emerald drapes framed tall windows, a marble fireplace gleamed under polished sconces, and an ornate clock ticked steadily on the mantel, its rhythm sounding far too loud in the uneasy silence. Miss Marple sat quietly in a rose-upholstered armchair, observing the tension in the room settle like dust. She had been in countless drawing rooms, some cheerful, some tragic, some hiding secrets under layers of politeness. This one, she sensed, belonged to the last category. Holmes stood near the fireplace, posture straight as a sword. His eyes traced the room with razor-like precision, taking in every twitch, every breath, every furtive glance. Sir Reginald remained beside his wife, his hand resting protectively on the back of her chair. Emily perched on the sofa's edge, twisting a handkerchief between her fingers. "Mr." Finch hovered near a bookcase like a nervous sparrow, and Mrs. Alder positioned herself near the tea service, as though defending it from invisible threats. Holmes began abruptly. "Let us speak of opportunity," he said. The portrait was removed by someone familiar with this house, someone who felt confident enough to manipulate its security. Mrs. Alder bristled. "Are you accusing us, sir?" Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Not accusing, questioning. There is a difference." Miss Marple folded her hands. "Perhaps before assigning suspicion, Mr. Holmes, we should allow each member of the household to speak about their movements that night." Holmes nodded tersely. "Very well." He gestured to Mrs. Alder. "You first." Mrs. Alder straightened her shoulders. "I was in the servants' wing by 9 in the evening. I checked the laundry, locked the back corridor, and went to bed around 10. Holmes watched her like a hawk. "And you did not leave your room afterward?" "No, sir. I am a heavy sleeper." Miss Marple noted the slight hesitation before the last sentence. "Interesting." Next, Holmes turned to Mr. Finch. "Your activities?" Finch coughed nervously. "I was in the gallery, working on catalogue updates, until perhaps 9:30. After that, I returned to my quarters. I heard footsteps once, just once, but I thought it was Lady Ashcroft." Lady Ashcroft's gaze flickered, but she said nothing. "And you, Emily?" Holmes asked. Emily's hands tightened around her handkerchief. I went to the library after dinner. I often read late. I stayed until after 11, I think." Holmes leaned slightly forward. "Alone?" Emily's gaze darted to Sir Reginald, then away. "Yes." Holmes held her gaze for a long moment before shifting focus. "Lady Ashcroft?" Lady Ashcroft's voice was soft but controlled. "I walked the corridor to clear my thoughts. I passed the gallery, but entered only briefly. The portrait was still there." "Still there," Holmes repeated, "but the timing of that certainty seems elusive." She looked away, a shadow passing over her features. Sir Reginald interjected quickly. "My wife has been under strain. She should not be pressed so harshly." Holmes ignored the remark. His eyes drifted to Miss Marple. "You see, Miss Marple, every account contains loose threads. Some might be innocent, some might not." Miss Marple smiled gently. "That is the nature of households, Mr. Holmes. People rarely remember events in perfect sequence unless they have a reason to." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And you suspect someone has such a reason?" Miss Marple didn't answer directly. Instead, she stood, her knitting bag hanging lightly over her wrist. "I should like to examine the house," she said. "Not only the gallery, but the surrounding rooms. One often finds clues where no one thinks to look." Holmes seemed intrigued. "You wish to investigate independently?" "Oh, not independently," Miss Marple replied kindly. "Merely differently." Holmes gave a short bow. "By all means." Miss Marple turned toward Emily. "My dear, would you escort me to the library? Since you were there that night, you might help me understand the layout." Emily startled, clearly not expecting to be singled out. "Yes, Miss Marple, of course." As they left the drawing room, Miss Marple felt Holmes's eyes on her, curious and analytical. She had given him no explanation for choosing Emily, but Holmes, she suspected, would create several explanations of his own. The corridor was quiet as Miss Marple and Emily walked side by side, their footsteps soft on the rich carpeting. The house felt different away from the others, calmer, but with an undercurrent of something unspoken. Emily's voice broke the silence. "Miss Marple, do you believe someone in this house stole it? Truly?" Miss Marple looked at her kindly. "I believe that where there is fear, there is often truth, and there is much fear in that room." Emily's eyes shimmered. "I don't want to think anyone here, anyone I care for, could do something like this." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Caring for others does not prevent wrongdoing, my dear. It merely complicates how we see it." Emily exhaled shakily. "I didn't sleep for several nights before the portrait disappeared." "Because of the whispers?" Miss Marple asked gently. Emily froze. "Whispers?" "Yes. Your aunt mentioned 2 voices." Emily's face drained of colour. I heard something too, soft voices, but when I opened the library door, the corridor was empty. I told myself it was imagination." Miss Marple stopped walking. "Did the voices sound familiar?" Emily hesitated long enough to answer the question. "They sounded like people arguing. One voice was a woman's, the other, I'm not sure." Miss Marple absorbed this quietly. "And did the woman's voice sound like your aunt's?" she asked. Emily's lips trembled. "No, it wasn't Aunt Agatha." Miss Marple placed a comforting hand on Emily's arm. "My dear, you must not fear the truth. Truth, when hidden, grows sharp edges, but when faced openly, it begins to soften." Emily whispered, "I wish I had your courage." "Oh, courage," Miss Marple chuckled softly, "is simply experience pretending to be wisdom." Emily managed a small smile. They reached the library, a vast room lined with towering shelves, soft chairs, and a wide desk facing a window. The scent of old paper mingled with lavender polish. Miss Marple walked slowly inside. "Tell me," she said softly, "did anyone come to the library that evening, or did anyone pass by?" Emily bit her lip. "I heard someone near the door. A shadow moved under the threshold, but when I opened it, no one." Miss Marple nodded, as though she had been expecting the answer. She approached the desk, noticing a small vase slightly off-center. She touched its rim. A faint smudge rested beneath it. "Someone touched this recently," she murmured. Emily frowned. "But I haven't moved it." Miss Marple smiled. "Then someone else has." And she knew, with growing certainty, that the threads of the mystery were beginning to tighten around a single figure. A woman. A woman whose secrets ran deeper than anyone suspected. Miss Marple remained in the library a moment longer, running her fingertips along the polished desk. The smudge beneath the vase was faint but deliberate, the kind of mark left when someone moves something in haste, not with the gentle absent-mindedness of everyday use. Emily stood nearby, twisting her handkerchief again. "Miss Marple, there's something I should tell you." Miss Marple turned, her expression warm and encouraging. "Go on, my dear. Secrets only grow heavier when carried alone." Emily closed her eyes for a brief moment, gathering courage. "I think someone has been entering the library at night," she said softly. "I've found books displaced, papers stirred. Once I found the window slightly open, even though I'm certain I never touched it." Miss Marple nodded calmly. "And why did you not mention this earlier?" "Because—" Emily hesitated, voice trembling. "Because I thought it might be Aunt Agatha. She has been restless lately, walking at odd hours, whispering to herself. Once I found her in the hallway, staring at the portrait gallery door as though she feared it." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "And yet you hesitated to implicate her." "She's been like a mother to me," Emily whispered, "and she's so fragile these days. I didn't want to add to her suffering." Miss Marple touched her arm gently. "You did nothing wrong, child. Compassion is not a flaw." Emily's eyes shone with gratitude and fear. Miss Marple continued her slow inspection of the library. She drifted toward a tall bookshelf and noticed that one volume, an old leather-bound journal, protruded slightly farther than the others. She eased it out. It wasn't a printed book. It was a diary. Emily gasped. That doesn't belong there. I've never seen it before." Miss Marple opened the first page. There was no name, only a date 30 years old. The handwriting was elegant, looping, unmistakably female. "These entries are old," Miss Marple murmured. "Long before your time, my dear." Emily looked puzzled. But who would place it here, and why now? Miss Marple closed the diary. Because someone wanted it found either by accident or design. Before she could examine further, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Holmes entered, his expression sharp. "Ah, Miss Marple, I thought I'd find you investigating the quieter corners." She smiled mildly. "Places where people think they'll remain unseen often hold more truth." Holmes's gaze drifted to the diary in her hands. "What have you discovered?" "I'm not entirely sure yet," Miss Marple replied, "but this diary belongs to someone who had a close connection to this house decades ago." Holmes took the book, flipping through it. "Interesting. Entries stop abruptly." "Which suggests," Miss Marple said, "that the writer either left suddenly or something interrupted her life." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "Sir Reginald's family history may hold more layers than he has shared." Emily swallowed. "Should we tell Uncle Reginald?" "Not yet," Miss Marple said gently. "Some truths require context, or they can do more harm than good." Holmes gave a faint, approving smirk, always thinking of the human factor. Miss Marple smiled back. "Someone must, Mr. Holmes." The three stepped out of the library, and Miss Marple paused. A faint trail, thin specks of dark blue velvet clung to the carpet, barely visible. She knelt gracefully, tracing the path with her gaze. Holmes crouched beside her. "Fibers?" "Yes," she said softly. "The same velvet I found beneath the gallery table." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And they lead where?" Miss Marple pointed down the corridor, where the fibers thinned, then disappeared entirely near a side door. Holmes rose. "A servant's passage," he muttered. Miss Marple nodded. "A convenient way to move unseen." Holmes pushed open the door. A narrow staircase descended into shadows. The air felt colder, tinged with dust and something faintly metallic. Miss Marple descended carefully, Holmes behind her, Emily lingering anxiously at the top. The staircase led to a small, dim storage chamber. Boxes were stacked neatly along one wall, a cabinet held cleaning supplies, and a single lantern cast flickering light across the stone floor. Miss Marple's gaze settled on the floor on a small, crushed petal. A white orchid petal. Holmes noticed it too, from the conservatory. "Yes," Miss Marple murmured, "and Lady Ashcroft carried orchids yesterday." Holmes straightened. "Are you suggesting she came down here?" Miss Marple tilted her head. "I am suggesting only that we follow the clues wherever they lead." Holmes paced the room. "But why would Lady Ashcroft use a servant's passage?" Miss Marple picked up the crushed petal. because she wished not to be seen. Holmes's jaw tightened. We need to question her properly. Miss Marple shook her head gently. Not yet. She is protecting someone or something. If pressed too soon, she may retreat. Holmes frowned. You believe she is shielding another person? I believe, Miss Marple said softly, that she is shielding a truth she fears will destroy everything she holds dear. Holmes's eyes sharpened. You speak cryptically, Miss Marple. Miss Marple gave a faint, wise smile. Sometimes the truth is easier to see when viewed askance. Miss Marple suggested they speak with Lady Ashcroft again, but gently. She and Holmes entered quietly. Lady Ashcroft was again by the orchids, but her posture was rigid, her hands clasped tightly. She looked up, startled, when they approached. Lady Ashcroft, Holmes began, we would like to ask you a few more questions. She swallowed. If I must. Miss Marple stepped forward kindly. My dear, we found something downstairs that we believe you may be able to explain. Lady Ashcroft's face drained of colour. Downstairs? Miss Marple reached into her handkerchief and revealed the crushed orchid petal. Lady Ashcroft's breath hitched. Holmes watched her with keen intensity. You were in the servants' passage. Tears filled Lady Ashcroft's eyes. Please do not tell Reginald. Miss Marple sat beside her. My dear, no one seeks to expose you, but you must tell us why. Lady Ashcroft pressed a trembling hand to her lips. I was looking for something I feared someone else might find first. What was it? Holmes demanded. Her voice broke. My great-grandmother's diary, she whispered. It contains a secret about our family, a secret I have spent years trying to keep hidden. Miss Marple exchanged a glance with Holmes. The diary they found in the library. Lady Ashcroft collapsed into quiet sobs, and Miss Marple knew at once. The theft of the portrait was not the beginning of the mystery. It was the result of something buried far deeper. Chapter 4. Trails in Two Directions. Lady Ashcroft's tears glimmered like dew on her eyelashes as she held the crushed orchid petal between trembling fingers. The conservatory seemed suddenly colder, the air heavy with unspoken truths. Holmes stood still as a statue, watching her with a mixture of calculation and empathy, though the latter he would never admit aloud. Miss Marple, meanwhile, leaned forward gently, her presence a soft reassurance amid the storm swirling inside Lady Ashcroft's mind. Take your time, my dear, Miss Marple murmured. Secrets long carried do not fall easily, but sharing them can lighten the heart. Lady Ashcroft pressed a hand to her chest, gathering the courage to speak. The diary, it belonged to my husband's great-grandmother, Eleanor Ashcroft, a woman of remarkable grace and considerable suffering. Miss Marple nodded, encouraging her. Holmes, however, was less patient. What, he said firmly, is the secret this diary contains? Lady Ashcroft closed her eyes. Eleanor's child, Sir Evelyn's firstborn, was not his biological son. He was the result of an affair, a scandalous one. Holmes lifted an eyebrow. And Sir Reginald believes himself descended from that child? Lady Ashcroft shook her head. He does not know. No one does. Only I discovered the truth while organizing old documents years ago. Miss Marple spoke softly. You kept this to spare him. To spare the entire family, Lady Ashcroft whispered. Reputation means everything in political circles. If the truth emerged, Reginald's opponents would seize upon it. The Ashcroft legacy would crumble. Holmes tapped his fingers lightly against the frame of an orchid pot. And the portrait? How does it fit into this? Lady Ashcroft swallowed hard. Eleanor wrote in her diary that she concealed a letter behind the portrait, a confession written in her own hand. She feared the truth might one day be twisted or lost. Miss Marple's eyes softened further. So the portrait held more than a likeness. It held a truth. Lady Ashcroft nodded. A dangerous one. Holmes's jaw tightened. Which means someone else may have known about the letter, and stolen the portrait to obtain it. Lady Ashcroft looked down at her hands. I searched for the diary because I feared someone else might have discovered Eleanor's secret. The whispers in the hallway, the uneasy feeling. I thought someone was looking for the same truth. Miss Marple leaned closer. And did you find anything unusual before the portrait disappeared? Lady Ashcroft hesitated. I found the gallery window unlocked, but I thought perhaps Mr. Finch had left it so while cleaning. Holmes snapped to attention. The window? Miss Marple's gaze sharpened, but earlier the window was locked. Lady Ashcroft nodded. I locked it myself after noticing it open. Holmes paced in a sharp, controlled line. So the window was unlocked earlier, but locked later, before the disappearance? Yes, Lady Ashcroft whispered. Miss Marple's chin lifted thoughtfully. Then someone could indeed have entered or exited before the theft. Holmes pushed his hand across his forehead. We have two diverging trails, one pointing toward those with access to the key, and another toward anyone who may have used that window earlier. Lady Ashcroft clutched Miss Marple's hand. Please, do not tell Reginald about the diary, not until we know more. Miss Marple patted her comfortingly. We shall proceed with care, my dear. Holmes cleared his throat. For now, Lady Ashcroft, return to your room. We will speak again soon. She nodded weakly and left the conservatory, her steps slow and heavy. As soon as the door clicked shut, Holmes spun toward Miss Marple. Well, he said sharply, this complicates matters more than I anticipated. Miss Marple lifted an eyebrow. A family secret does tend to complicate things, Mr. Holmes. Not the secret, Holmes snapped, the lies surrounding it. Miss Marple chuckled softly. Every secret is wrapped in a nest of little lies. People use them to cushion the truth. Holmes paced again. Someone must have known about this letter. Otherwise, why risk stealing a portrait? And why whisper in the corridors at night? Miss Marple nodded. And why move the diary? Holmes turned abruptly. You believe Lady Ashcroft moved it? Miss Marple smiled. If she had, she would not have seemed so shocked when we showed it to her. Holmes scowled, unhappy but conceding the point. So, he muttered, another player, someone who knows the Ashcroft history intimately. Miss Marple hummed thoughtfully. Families often have shadows, Mr. Holmes, and shadows can stretch across generations. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Then let us examine those shadows. Holmes and Miss Marple returned to the drawing room, where Mrs. Alder and Mr. Finch still lingered nervously. Emily had retreated to her room, claiming a headache. Holmes fixed Mrs. Alder with a penetrating stare. Mrs. Alder, did you ever hear Lady Ashcroft mention the great-grandmother's diary? Ever see her searching for it? Mrs. Alder stiffened. No, sir. Lady Ashcroft keeps her matters private. Miss Marple stepped closer. My dear, you notice everything in this house. You have managed it for more than 2 decades. Mrs. Alder's face softened. Well, I did notice her visiting the guest attic recently. She rarely goes there. Holmes's eyes gleamed. The attic? Mrs. Alder nodded. Yes, she asked for the old trunks to be dusted. Miss Marple exchanged a thoughtful glance with Holmes. Interesting, she murmured. Holmes turned to Finch. And you, Mr. Finch? Did you ever come across documents relating to the family's past? Finch swallowed nervously. I oversee the art, not the genealogy. But you heard whispers, Holmes pressed. Yes, Finch admitted. 2 voices. One was definitely a woman. Miss Marple eyed him gently. And the other? Finch hesitated. I had the impression it was younger, perhaps Emily's age. Miss Marple's heart gave a small, perceptive flutter. Holmes straightened sharply. Emily? Finch nodded, shamefaced. I'm not certain, but it seemed possible. Holmes's posture grew rigid. We must speak to Emily immediately. Miss Marple placed a calming hand on his arm. Gently, Mr. Holmes. Holmes exhaled sharply but nodded. Miss Marple lowered her voice. There is fear in this house, but fear does not always indicate guilt. It often indicates danger. Holmes's eyes narrowed. You believe Emily is in danger? Miss Marple looked toward the staircase, where Emily's room lay above them. I believe, she said softly, that Emily knows more than she realizes, and that someone does not want her to speak. Holmes straightened. Then we go to her now. Miss Marple nodded. But deep inside, she already sensed the truth. Two trails indeed existed. Holmes followed the logical one. Miss Marple followed the human one. And those trails were about to collide. Holmes ascended the staircase with long, purposeful strides, his coat sweeping behind him like the tail of a hunting falcon. Miss Marple followed at a slower but no less intentional pace. She did not rush. She had learned long ago that a calm approach revealed more truths than a forceful one. Holmes's pace might uncover facts, but hers uncovered confessions. As they reached the upper corridor, a gust of cool air drifted through the hallway, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender and old wood. Emily's door was slightly ajar. Holmes knocked gently. "Miss Emily, may we come in?" A soft voice answered, "Yes." They entered to find Emily sitting on her bed, knees drawn up, a blanket draped loosely around her shoulders. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as though she had been crying or desperately trying not to. Holmes observed her with keen, hawk-like attention. Miss Marple sat beside her, placing a gentle hand on the young woman's trembling fingers. "My dear," Miss Marple began softly, "we have learned something rather troubling about the family's past, something connected to your great-great-grandmother." Emily's gaze flickered with recognition and fear. "The diary?" she whispered. Miss Marple nodded, letting the silence settle. Holmes stepped closer. "We also know you heard whispers the night the portrait vanished, and that you may have been near the gallery." Emily's shoulders tensed. I didn't take the portrait. You must believe me." "We do," Miss Marple said warmly. "But you may have seen something, heard something that frightened you." Emily swallowed hard. Her fingers clenched the blanket. "Lady Ashcroft," she whispered. "My aunt. She wasn't alone in the corridor that night." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Go on." Emily looked from Holmes to Miss Marple, then back. Her breathing quickened. "I wasn't supposed to hear it. I was heading to the library when I heard whispers near the gallery. One voice was Aunt Agatha's. The other—" she hesitated, trembling. "It belonged to Mrs. Alder." Holmes's eyes widened slightly. "The housekeeper?" Emily nodded. "They were arguing, quietly but intensely. I heard Mrs. Alder say something like, 'You can't keep hiding it forever.' And Aunt Agatha said, 'If he finds out, it will destroy him.'" Miss Marple's face softened. "That must have frightened you, child." "I didn't understand," Emily whispered. "I still don't. And then, when the portrait disappeared, I thought, maybe they... She broke off, unable to continue. Holmes paced, energy crackling around him. Mrs. Alder knew about the diary, perhaps even about the letter behind the portrait. And that means... "It means," Miss Marple interjected gently, "that Lady Ashcroft was not the only one afraid of the truth." Holmes stopped pacing. "You suspect Mrs. Alder?" "I suspect," Miss Marple replied calmly, "that Mrs. Alder has been in this household long enough to know every secret whispered through its halls." Emily looked up desperately. "Do you think she took the portrait?" Miss Marple shook her head. "I think Mrs. Alder might have been seeking something too, but she is far too careful a woman to commit such an elaborate theft alone." Holmes folded his arms. "So we still have more than one suspect?" "Possibly," Miss Marple said, "but suspects reveal themselves through patterns, and Mrs. Alder's behavior suggests guilt, but of which crime?" Emily gave a soft sob. "This house feels cursed." Miss Marple gently brushed a strand of hair from Emily's face. "Houses are not cursed, my dear. People simply leave too many shadows behind." Holmes straightened abruptly. "We need to confront Mrs. Alder." Miss Marple rose as well. "Confrontation may bring resistance. Let us instead ask her a different sort of question." Holmes frowned. "A different sort?" Miss Marple smiled. "A question she cannot answer without revealing the truth. Back in the drawing room, Mrs. Alder stood rigidly as they entered, her hands folded with excessive precision. "Mrs. Alder," Holmes said sharply, "we must discuss your late-night conversation with Lady Ashcroft." Mrs. Alder's face paled instantly. I don't know what you're referring to." Holmes advanced. "You argued with her. We know this." Mrs. Alder shook her head frantically. "I would never argue with Lady Ashcroft. Never." Miss Marple stepped forward gently. "My dear, fear has a way of twisting our memories. Perhaps you were only trying to help her." Mrs. Alder's eyes filled with tears she could no longer contain. I only wanted to protect her. She was so distressed, so frightened." "Frightened of what?" Holmes demanded. Mrs. Alder wiped a trembling hand across her cheek. "Of losing everything, of Reginald discovering the truth." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "And you knew that truth as well." Mrs. Alder's voice cracked. "I was her confidant, her friend. She could not bear the thought of her husband's legacy being tarnished. And when she learned, the letter was hidden behind the portrait." Holmes leaned forward. "She wanted to retrieve it." Mrs. Alder nodded miserably. "Yes, but she was too afraid to go alone. She begged me to help her search. We looked through the gallery, but someone came, we heard footsteps, and she panicked. We fled down the servants' passage." Holmes's eyes glittered. "Footsteps?" Mrs. Alder nodded. "A man's footsteps." Holmes stiffened. "Sir Reginald?" Mrs. Alder shook her head vigorously. "No, softer, lighter, like someone younger." Miss Marple exchanged a glance with Holmes. "Emily." But Emily had seemed genuinely terrified. And yet, before Holmes could speak, Miss Marple raised her hand calmly. "One final question, Mrs. Alder." Mrs. Alder looked up helplessly. Miss Marple leaned in, voice gentle but piercing. "When you returned with Lady Ashcroft to your rooms, who did you see coming from the corridor near the gallery?" Mrs. Alder gasped, caught off guard by a question she had not prepared for. I saw." She froze. Holmes stepped forward. "Yes, you saw who?" Mrs. Alder whispered. "Mr. Finch." Holmes's face hardened. Miss Marple nodded, unsurprised. "Thank you, my dear," she said softly. "That is what we needed to know." Holmes spun on his heel, heading for the corridor. "Come, Miss Marple. The curator has some explaining to do." Miss Marple followed, her voice calm and steady. "Yes, but Mr. Holmes." Holmes paused. Miss Marple met his gaze. "Let us remember, guilt comes in shades, and not every shade leads to the crime we expect." Holmes gave her a curt nod. Together, they went to confront Mr. Finch and the next truth waiting in the shadows. Chapter 5. The Trap Miss Marple Sets. Mr. Finch's quarters were located at the far end of the east wing, an isolated, quiet stretch of hallway that smelled faintly of old parchment and turpentine. Holmes marched ahead with determined strides, his coat flaring behind him like a cape. Miss Marple followed calmly, hands clasped neatly before her. Holmes knocked once, firmly. No answer. He knocked again. Still silence. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "He's in there. I can feel it." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Or he's hiding. Nervous men often do." Holmes's patience evaporated. "Mr. Finch, open the door at once." After a tense pause, the doorknob rattled. The door opened a mere inch before stopping, blocked from the inside by a security chain. Finch's pale, frightened eyes peered through the gap. "Mr. Holmes, Miss Marple, I'm not feeling well." Holmes's tone sharpened. "We've come for answers. Now." Finch swallowed audibly. "Answers? I've told you everything." Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice soft as a warm breeze. "My dear Mr. Finch, we know you were near the gallery the night the portrait disappeared." Finch's breath hitched. "Who said that?" "Someone who saw you," Miss Marple replied. "Someone with no reason to lie." Finch's eyes darted wildly, as though hunting for an escape route. Holmes leaned closer. "Unlock the door." Finch hesitated, then shut the door. The chain slid open, and the door reappeared, this time wide enough for them to enter. The room was cluttered with books, sketches, catalogues, and stacks of brittle paper. On a table lay several brushes and cloths, as though Finch had been restoring something very recently or nervously distracting himself. Holmes crossed his arms. "Mr. Finch, you were seen leaving the corridor outside the gallery on the night the portrait vanished. What were you doing?" Finch wrung his hands. "Nothing. I swear nothing at all. I heard voices. Someone was whispering, arguing. It frightened me. I left immediately." Holmes's sharp gaze narrowed. "You didn't mention that before." I didn't want to seem like I was spying on the family." Miss Marple stepped forward, her expression gentle but unyielding. "Mr. Finch, dear, this house is full of fear. But fear can make innocent actions look suspicious. If you wish to protect yourself, you must be honest." Finch's shoulders sagged. "I didn't take the portrait. I could never." Miss Marple nodded. "I believe you did not steal the portrait." Finch blinked, surprised and relieved. Holmes turned sharply. "Miss Marple, how can you say that? The man admitted he was at the scene." Miss Marple gave Holmes a pleasant smile. "Presence is not the same as guilt, and Mr. Finch is far too timid for such a bold theft." Finch's relief lasted only a moment until Miss Marple added gently, "But you know something important." Finch froze. Holmes took a step closer. "What did you see, Finch?" Finch's voice cracked. "I saw Lady Ashcroft." Holmes frowned. "We already know she was there." Finch shook his head fiercely. No, not just her. She wasn't alone." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Mrs. Alder was with her." "No," Finch shouted, then clasped his hands over his mouth. His voice had slipped out louder than he intended. Holmes blinked. "No?" Finch stared at his feet, trembling. Miss Marple's voice softened. "Mr. Finch, who was she with?" Finch swallowed hard. His throat bobbed painfully. "Emily," he whispered. Holmes stiffened. "Emily?" Finch nodded, tears forming. "I saw the two of them, Lady Ashcroft and Miss Emily, standing outside the gallery." Lady Ashcroft looked upset. Emily was holding her arm, whispering to her. Miss Marple absorbed this calmly. Holmes, however, frowned deeply. "But Mrs. Alder said she was the one who accompanied Lady Ashcroft." Miss Marple nodded. "Indeed, and people lie for different reasons." Holmes looked thoughtful. "So Mrs. Alder lied to protect Lady Ashcroft." Miss Marple added gently, "And Emily may have lied to protect her aunt." Finch wrung his hands. "I was afraid to tell you. Emily is kind, and Lady Ashcroft, she is fragile." Holmes frowned at this new piece of the puzzle. Emily is now implicated twice by Finch and indirectly by Lady Ashcroft, and she heard the whispers. She claims she opened the library door to find no one there. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze distant as she pieced threads together with care. "Emily is not our thief," she said quietly. "She is scared, but she is not our thief." Holmes scoffed lightly. "You're certain?" "Quite," Miss Marple replied with certainty. "Emily hides secrets, but not malicious ones. She is protecting someone she loves." Holmes crossed his arms. "Then who is our thief?" Miss Marple glanced around Finch's room at shelves, scattered paper, and a small wooden box with an unlocked latch. Holmes noticed her gaze. "Do you believe the box contains something, Miss Marple?" "Not the box," she murmured. "The latch." Holmes arched a brow. "The latch?" Miss Marple walked closer and tapped the latch lightly. "This latch is bent, recently, I'd say, as if someone tried to force it open." Finch gasped. I don't know how that happened." Miss Marple turned to him, her tone almost grandmotherly. "It didn't happen by accident. Someone searched this room." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "For what?" Miss Marple folded her hands calmly. "For the diary." Finch's jaw dropped. "The diary? But But I didn't take it. I know, Miss Marple said. The thief thought you had. Holmes's face lit with realization. Because Finch is the curator, the one who would naturally be expected to notice important documents. Miss Marple nodded. Someone believed the diary was hidden here, and when they didn't find it, they panicked. Holmes leaned forward, which explains why they escalated to stealing the portrait. Miss Marple smiled softly. Yes, because the letter behind the portrait was their true goal. Holmes let out a long breath, admiration flickering in his eyes. Miss Marple, you continue to surprise me. She dipped her head modestly. It is only observation, Mr. Holmes. Holmes turned to Finch. You are cleared, for now, but do not leave the estate. Finch nodded frantically. I won't, I swear. As they left Finch's quarters, Holmes murmured under his breath. Lady Ashcroft, Emily, Mrs. Alder, the diary, the whispering, the window. Miss Marple finished softly. And a thief becoming desperate. Holmes looked at her sharply. Miss Marple, you have a plan, don't you? She smiled serenely. Yes, Mr. Holmes, and it's time to set the trap. Evening settled over the Ashcroft estate like a velvet curtain, casting long shadows through the hallways and turning every corner into a whispering mystery. Lamps flickered softly along the walls, their pools of golden light interrupted by the occasional swaying silhouette of a passing servant. In the drawing-room, Holmes stood at the window, pipe in hand, staring into the darkening gardens, as though the answers might materialize from the hedges themselves. Miss Marple sat comfortably in an armchair, quietly knitting a simple, rhythmic motion that belied the storm of calculation unfolding behind her serene blue eyes. Holmes finally turned. You've been unusually quiet, Miss Marple. She smiled faintly. My dear Mr. Holmes, loud thinkers make noise, quiet thinkers make plans. Holmes raised a brow. And your plan is? Simple, Miss Marple said gently. We allow the thief to reveal themselves. Holmes scoffed. Criminals rarely rise to bait unless it's something irresistible. Miss Marple nodded. Exactly. Which is why we must offer them something they cannot refuse. Holmes folded his arms. And what might that be? Miss Marple set down her knitting. The diary. Holmes blinked. The one we found? Oh no, she replied lightly. That one stays safely hidden. We shall provide a decoy. Holmes's eyes suddenly gleamed. A false diary? A convincing copy, Miss Marple corrected. One containing just enough truth to tempt the thief into believing it real, and enough fiction to expose their motives. Holmes tapped his chin. Interesting. And where do you intend to leave this decoy? Miss Marple's gaze drifted toward the ceiling. In the place the thief is certain it must be somewhere the real diary was believed to be kept. Holmes followed her gaze. The library? No, Miss Marple said softly. Lady Ashcroft said she hid the diary once before, in the attic trunks. Holmes stiffened. The guest attic. Miss Marple nodded. If we place a false diary there with the right kind of hints, the right sort of aged handwriting, someone will not resist checking it. Holmes studied her with growing admiration. You mean to lure them into believing they've finally found what they sought? And in doing so, Miss Marple said, her voice calm but unwavering, we shall learn who has been slinking through passages, whispering in corridors, and searching rooms. Holmes gave a short, amused bow. Miss Marple, you are more dangerous than you look. She chuckled. A lifetime of observing human behavior tends to sharpen one's wits. An hour later, Holmes and Miss Marple sat in the study with a blank, leather-bound notebook between them. Miss Marple dipped a quill pen into a pot of sepia-toned ink. With your permission, she said, I shall draft the entries. I know how women of that era phrased their thoughts. Holmes inclined his head. By all means. Miss Marple wrote in gentle, looping strokes. If ever the truth of his birth is uncovered, may it be found only by one who seeks justice, not destruction. Holmes watched silently, impressed despite himself. "You craft deception with unsettling ease," he murmured. Miss Marple smiled. "Only when necessary, and only to reveal a greater truth." She continued writing for several minutes, creating entries that hinted at Eleanor Ashcroft's secret child, at a letter hidden behind the portrait, and at fears that the truth might one day return to haunt the family. When finished, she closed the diary and blew lightly on the pages. There. Enough truth to entice, enough mystery to provoke. Holmes picked it up, and now we plant it. The guest attic was a dusty, dim place filled with trunks, tea chests, and forgotten relics. Cobwebs veiled the upper corners like delicate lace. Miss Marple moved quietly among the stacks, selecting an old trunk whose brass clasps were tarnished with age. "This one," she whispered. Holmes opened it, revealing old linens and lace gowns yellowed by time. Miss Marple tucked the decoy diary beneath a folded skirt, but left just enough of the corner exposed that a determined searcher might catch sight of it. Holmes nodded approvingly. "Subtle, tempting." Miss Marple smiled. "Now we wait?" Holmes frowned. "Wait? In the attic?" "Oh no, Mr. Holmes, that would make our culprit far too cautious." She gestured to a narrow door at the back. "You shall hide there." Holmes blinked. "In the linen closet?" "In the linen closet," Miss Marple repeated, entirely serious. "If the thief suspects your presence, they will keep away, but if they believe the house sleeps, they will come." Holmes sighed, resigned. "Very well, and you?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "I shall be in the corridor, listening." Holmes climbed into the closet with mild indignation. "One day, Miss Marple, I shall devise a plan that requires you to hide behind bed linens." She smiled sweetly. "I look forward to it." She closed the closet door, leaving Holmes in the aromatic company of lavender-scented sheets and dust. Miss Marple positioned herself at the top of the attic stairs, shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The house was silent, except for the distant ticking of clocks and the soft stirrings of night wind against the walls. Minutes passed, then perhaps half an hour. And then, faintly, footsteps. Soft, secretive, careful. Someone was coming. Miss Marple remained completely still. The attic door creaked open. A figure slipped inside, moving with practiced stealth. Miss Marple didn't need to see the face clearly to know the silhouette. Thin, slightly hunched, nervous movements. Mr. Finch. He hurried toward the trunk with trembling hands and lifted the lid. He rummaged, desperate, frantic, until he froze. He saw the diary. With shaking fingers, he reached for it. Miss Marple stepped into the doorway. "Good evening, Mr. Finch." Finch whirled around, dropping the diary. His face turned ashen. Miss Marple, what, how?" Holmes burst from the linen closet like a lion freed from a cage. "Mr. Finch," he bellowed, "we have you." Finch stumbled back. "No, please, let me explain." Holmes advanced. "You stole the portrait." "No," Finch cried, shaking. "I never touched it. I only wanted to know—" Miss Marple raised a hand. "Mr. Holmes." Holmes stopped. Miss Marple stepped closer to Finch, her voice steady and warm. "My dear, if you did not take the portrait, then why were you searching for this diary?" Finch swallowed painfully, tears forming. "Because," he whispered, "I thought Emily took it." Holmes blinked. "Emily?" Finch nodded miserably. "To protect Lady Ashcroft, I thought, if I found the diary first, I could shield them both." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "And the portrait, Mr. Finch? Who do you believe took it?" Finch trembled. His voice came out as a whisper. "I think someone who feared what was behind it." Holmes glared. "Who?" Finch whispered. "Lady Ashcroft." Silence fell in the attic like dust. Miss Marple folded her hands calmly. "No," she said softly, "Lady Ashcroft did not steal the portrait." Both Holmes and Finch stared at her. Miss Marple lifted her chin, eyes bright. "But I know who did." Chapter 6. When Logic Meets Intuition. The attic seemed to freeze in time. Dust motes hung suspended in the lamplight. Holmes stood rigid as a statue, his jaw tight, eyes narrowed. Finch trembled beside the trunk, the decoy diary still lying open like a guilty secret. Miss Marple alone looked calm, almost serene. Her soft smile and gentle posture contrasted sharply with the tensions swirling around her. Holmes's voice cut the silence. "You claim you know who stole the portrait, Miss Marple. On what grounds?" Miss Marple clasped her hands. "On the grounds of human behavior, Mr. Holmes. People rarely act without reason. And every person in this house has shown cracks of fear, except one." Holmes blinked. "One?" Finch looked bewildered. "Not Lady Ashcroft?" "No," Miss Marple said gently. "But she hid secrets," Holmes argued. "She hid fear," Miss Marple corrected, "but not guilt." Holmes frowned. "Then Mrs. Alder?" She lied. "Loyalty," Miss Marple said softly, "not deception for personal gain." Holmes paced, his brain spinning with deductions. "Emily, she was present that night." "Emily lied to protect her aunt," Miss Marple said. "She does not possess the confidence or the desperation to orchestrate such a theft." Finch swallowed. "Then who?" Miss Marple stepped past them, moving toward the attic window. She touched the sill lightly. "This window was opened recently." Holmes frowned deeper. "By whom?" Miss Marple smiled. "By someone who prefers entrances and exits that avoid notice. Someone who knows the servants' passages, the attic stairs, the back corridors." Finch whispered, terrified. "Mrs. Alder?" "No, dear," Miss Marple said kindly. "Someone else familiar with both sides of the house." Miss Marple turned toward the staircase. "Shall we go downstairs? I believe our thief will be waiting." Her voice was calm, but Holmes felt a spark of excitement ignite. She had reached her conclusion, and now she was ready to confront the culprit. The drawing room glowed with firelight, its golden warmth flickering over the faces of those gathered Emily with anxious eyes, Lady Ashcroft pale and fragile, Sir Reginald standing tall but drawn tight with worry, and Mrs. Alder clutching a folded cloth like a shield. Holmes and Finch followed Miss Marple into the room. Holmes closed the doors behind them deliberately. "What is the meaning of this?" Sir Reginald demanded. "Finch, why on earth do you look like you've seen a ghost?" Finch opened his mouth, but Miss Marple motioned gently for silence. "Sir Reginald," she said pleasantly, "your patience is appreciated. We are all here because a crime has been committed, a portrait stolen, and a secret put at risk." Sir Reginald stiffened. "I will not have my family's name dragged through." Miss Marple interrupted kindly. "My dear Sir Reginald, your family is not on trial, only the truth is." Holmes stepped forward, hands behind his back. "Miss Marple claims she knows who stole the portrait." A murmur rustled through the room. Emily gasped quietly. Mrs. Alder gripped her cloth tighter. Sir Reginald's voice wavered. You've found the culprit?" Miss Marple's eyes swept slowly over the group. "Yes." Lady Ashcroft trembled. Was it Emily?" Emily shook her head violently. "Aunt Agatha? No, I would never." Miss Marple raised a hand. "Emily is innocent." Holmes cleared his throat. "Then Mrs. Alder." Mrs. Alder's lips pressed together in fear. "I swear." "She is innocent as well," Miss Marple said gently. Holmes frowned. "Finch?" Finch shook his head desperately. Miss Marple placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "No, Mr. Finch did not steal anything." Sir Reginald's face reddened. "Then who is left? You make no sense." But Miss Marple's smile held quiet certainty. "There is one person in this house who has remained calm throughout, who showed neither fear nor guilt, only irritation at the investigation. One who had both access to the gallery and a very personal motive." Holmes turned sharply, following her gaze, to Sir Reginald Ashcroft. The room burst into stunned whispers. Sir Reginald's face went pale. "What? Miss Marple, how dare you?" Holmes looked utterly stunned. Sir Reginald? But his reputation, his concern— Miss Marple nodded. Precisely. Too much concern for the family name, too eager to avoid scrutiny, too insistent that the truth remain hidden. Lady Ashcroft's breath caught. "Reginald?" Miss Marple stepped toward him, her voice as gentle as a grandmother's. "You found the diary years ago, not Lady Ashcroft. You discovered Eleanor's letter. You realized the truth, that you were descended not from a decorated war hero, but from a scandal your ancestors had tried to bury." Sir Reginald staggered. That's absurd." "No," Miss Marple said softly. "It wounded your pride so deeply that you hid the diary. But when you learned the letter was behind the portrait, you panicked." Holmes stared in disbelief. "He stole his own portrait?" "Yes," Miss Marple replied, "because he feared someone else would find the letter, someone who would not hide the truth as he did." Emily whispered, horrified, "Uncle, how could you?" Sir Reginald's facade cracked. His voice broke. "I did it for all of you, for the Ashcroft legacy, for my father, for my name." Miss Marple shook her head. "For your pride, Sir Reginald, not for your family." He collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Lady Ashcroft sobbed quietly, not out of shock, but out of heartbreak. Holmes, recovering, stepped forward. "Where is the portrait?" Sir Reginald whispered hoarsely, "In the stable loft, behind the hay." Finch looked stunned. Emily began crying softly. Mrs. Alder lowered her head, tears falling silently. Miss Marple approached Sir Reginald with genuine compassion. "Secrets, my dear sir, are like weeds. The longer you let them grow, the deeper their roots spread." Holmes watched Miss Marple with a new kind of respect, a deep, admiring awe. "You've solved it," he said quietly, and without a shred of physical evidence, only observation. Miss Marple smiled. "And intuition, Mr. Holmes, intuition shaped by a lifetime of watching human hearts." Holmes bowed his head slightly. "And today, intuition outthought deduction." Miss Marple chuckled softly. "Oh, I wouldn't say that. We simply walked different paths to the same truth." Holmes smiled. "And yours was shorter." Miss Marple resumed her knitting, adding gently, "Now, Mr. Holmes, shall we retrieve the portrait?" Holmes nodded. "Yes, let's restore what was taken." And together they left the drawing-room, two detectives, one young, one old, united by the truth at last revealed. The stable loft was quiet and dust-filled, illuminated only by moonlight spilling through wooden slats. Holmes climbed the ladder first, lantern in hand, his silhouette sharp against the pale silver glow. Miss Marple followed more slowly, her steps steady, her shawl fluttering lightly around her shoulders. "Mind the last step, Miss Marple," Holmes called down. "It's steep." "Oh, steep steps don't trouble me," she replied pleasantly. "It's people who make mischief on them that worry me." Holmes allowed himself a small, rare smile. At the top of the loft, stacks of hay formed uneven mounds. Birds' nests occupied corners of the rafters. Holmes held the lantern high, sweeping the light across the space. "There," he said at last. A large bundle was tucked between wooden beams, partially camouflaged under a thick layer of hay. Holmes brushed it aside and uncovered the ornate frame, dusty but unmistakably intact. "The portrait," Holmes announced, his voice tightening with relief. Miss Marple stepped closer, brushing the dust away with a soft handkerchief. "Untouched," she said softly, "despite everything." Holmes examined the backside of the frame with meticulous care. After a moment, he pried open a narrow wooden panel. A folded, yellowed paper slid out into his gloved hand. "The letter," he murmured. Miss Marple nodded, though her eyes held sorrow rather than triumph. "Take care," she whispered. "Secrets preserved in fear often carry the weight of many lives." Holmes unfolded the letter carefully, scanning it with his piercing gaze. After a moment, He shook his head. A confession, Eleanor Ashcroft wrote of her affair, and of the child born of it. And Sir Reginald feared that exposure would ruin him, Miss Marple said gently. So he hid the truth, and then hid the truth again. Holmes sighed, rolling the paper closed. It is remarkable, he said, how much destruction a single secret can cause. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Secrets are like cracks, Mr. Holmes. Hairline at first, then widening until the entire wall collapses. Holmes tucked the letter safely back into the frame. We should return it. The family deserves closure. Miss Marple agreed. When they arrived at the estate, dawn was brushing light across the sky. The household gathered in the foyer, Lady Ashcroft trembling beside Emily, Finch wringing his hands, and Mrs. Alder quietly crying into her apron. Sir Reginald stood alone, leaning heavily against a marble pillar. The burden he carried seemed to have aged him 10 years overnight. Holmes stepped forward, portrait in hand. We found it, he said simply. Gasps fluttered through the group. Lady Ashcroft approached slowly, touching the frame with a trembling hand. You preserved our family's history. Holmes shook his head. Not I. He glanced at Miss Marple. Miss Marple preserved your truth. Emily stepped forward. Miss Marple, will my uncle be arrested? Miss Marple's gentle voice soothed like warm tea. That is not for me to decide, my dear. But he did not commit this crime to harm others. He acted out of fear, a misguided fear, but fear nonetheless. Sir Reginald lifted his gaze, eyes filled with regret. I only wished to protect the legacy entrusted to me. I could not bear for the world to know. Miss Marple touched his arm lightly. Pride is a heavy burden, Sir Reginald. It can crush even the strongest souls. Holmes added quietly, the truth rarely destroys families, but hiding it always does. Sir Reginald bowed his head. I will confess everything to the board. My career, my reputation, it may be over. Miss Marple shook her head softly. Your reputation will survive honesty far better than deception, and your family will survive truth far better than lies. Lady Ashcroft slipped her hand into his. For the first time in days, her posture steadied. We shall face it together, she whispered to her husband. Emily approached Finch and hugged him tightly, relief flooding her face. Mrs. Alder dabbed at her eyes. Oh, thank heavens! Holmes observed the emotional scene with a mixture of admiration and unease. He turned to Miss Marple. You were right, he said with quiet sincerity. Human nature reveals more than clues ever could. Miss Marple chuckled softly. You underestimate yourself, Mr. Holmes. You see everything, but sometimes one must also feel. Holmes offered a rare smile. A weakness of mine, perhaps. Not a weakness, Miss Marple corrected kindly, just a different strength. Later that morning, as sunlight streamed through the estate windows, Holmes found Miss Marple in the garden, admiring a blooming orchid Lady Ashcroft had gifted her. You have a remarkable gift, Miss Marple, he said. She smiled, recognizing the sincerity beneath his formal tone. Oh, I simply notice what others overlook. Holmes folded his hands behind his back. Still, you solved what I could not. Miss Marple looked up, her eyes twinkling. You solved it too, Mr. Holmes, just from another direction. Holmes laughed softly. A diplomatic assessment. She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. And between you and me, my dear, your deductions were quite excellent. You simply followed the wrong thread. Holmes bowed his head in amused respect. And you followed the right one. Miss Marple's smile deepened. That, Mr. Holmes, is the beauty of human nature. Every person leaves a different thread. We merely learn which ones matter. Holmes extended his hand. It has been an honor. Miss Marple placed her gloved hand in his. And a pleasure. He released her hand and glanced at the portrait now safely restored in the gallery. Perhaps, Holmes mused, we may work together again someday. Miss Marple chuckled. Only if you promise not to underestimate knitting needles. Holmes laughed. a dangerous weapon in the right hands. She winked. More effective than revolvers in some cases. Holmes bowed politely. Until our next mystery. Miss Marple nodded. Until then, Mr. Holmes. And as Sherlock Holmes departed down the gravel path, Miss Marple watched him go. Two brilliant minds, two different methods. Logic and intuition. Deduction and observation. Separate paths, meeting only when the world required both. The mystery was solved, the truth restored, and the partnership, unlikely, unexpected, remained unforgettable. Candlelight Mystery message. In the dim glow of a single candle, the old mansion finally fell silent. The whispers that once crawled through its corridors faded as the truth came to light. The hidden letter, the vanished footsteps, and the trembling shadows had all pointed to a single secret, one the house had guarded for decades. Now, as the flame flickered gently, the mystery rested at last. The heroes stepped out into the cool night, leaving behind a place where secrets once breathed. And the candle, burning low, seemed to sigh with relief before melting into darkness. Sometimes mysteries end not with thunder, but with a quiet, glowing truth. If you enjoy our stories, like and subscribe our channel.